gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer. There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to His. Oh, how strange and divine, I can sing, all is mine, yet not I, but through Christ in me. The night is dark, but I am not forsaken, for by my side the Savior He will stay. I labor on in weakness and rejoicing, for in my need His power is displayed. To this I hold, my shepherd will defend me. Through the deepest valley He will lead. Oh, the night has been won, and I shall overcome, yet not I, but through Christ in me. No fate I dread, I know I am forgiven. The future sure, the price it has been paid. For Jesus bled and suffered for my pardon, and He was raised to overthrow the grave. To this I hold, my sin has been defeated. Jesus now and ever is my plea. Oh, the chains are released, I can sing, I am free, yet not I, but through Christ in me. With every breath I long to follow Jesus, for He has said that He will bring me home. And day by day I know He will renew me, until I stand with joy before the throne. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. All the glory evermore to Him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. All the glory evermore to Him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me.
This morning's scripture comes from Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 through 17, and Matthew 25, verse 14 through 30. In the Old Testament, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose name were Shiphrah and Puah, "When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live." The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. And from the New Testament, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, 'Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I made 5 talents more.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, 'Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more.' His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours.' But the master said to him, 'You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested the money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth."
Good morning. There are 3 dominant images this morning: the Empire State Building, Hebrew midwives, and the parable of the talents. So let's start with the first. In his book, Carpe Diem, Tony Campolo begins the book with this story. He said he was teaching a class at a local university on existentialism. And so he walks into the first day of class and asks the question, "How long have you lived?" And the class just looks back at him. And so he picks on some poor soul on the front row, and he says, "How long have you lived?" And the student thinks and says, "Well, 22 years." And he said, No. I don't want to know how long you've been breathing. I want to know how long you've been alive." And so he goes, "Let me explain with this story." And so Tony tells him a story about a high school field trip that he took, or a middle school field trip he took when he was 12 years old. And they went to New York City. And in New York City, of course, they went to the Empire State Building, and they went up to the observation deck of the Empire State Building. And when they first got there, they was just goofing off like 12-year-old boys do. But he said suddenly he found himself at the rail, looking across this amazing city, and he thought, "Tony, you're on top of the Empire State Building." He said it was with a heightened sense of awareness that he experienced this moment. It was almost like he was watching himself experience the moment. He said, I do not know how long I will physically live, but if I were to live 1,000 years, I would remember that moment because I truly lived it. And so with that as your context, I ask you again, how long have you lived? And the young student says, "Well, gosh, if I think about it with that sort of heightened sense of awareness, Probably not much more than, I don't know, a few minutes, not much more than that. You know, the truth is, most of my life has been the meaningless passage of time with all too few moments that I've truly felt alive. So Tony concludes the opening of the book with this. He says, and still that student is more fortunate than many, because he said, for far too many people, they are born and years later they die without ever having really lived at all. He said they eat, they sleep, they work, they play, they learn, and they forget. He said they play it safe and they tiptoe through life with no other aspiration other than to arrive at death safely. It's that last line that always gets me. Tiptoe through life with no other aspiration other than to arrive at death safely. Do we ever feel like we're tiptoeing through life? Yet, as Christians, we have this book, this collection of books and stories inspired by God called the Bible. And in this Bible, I believe that it is one story from beginning to end, one story from Genesis to Revelation. You see, it's the story of God putting his family back together. It's this story of God asking us to enter into that story and be part of his story of restoration. And so the whole Bible is full of individual stories of people that did not tiptoe through life, people that walked with God and were part of God's plan. And that brings us to our second dominant image. You see, the king of Egypt, it says, the Pharaoh, the most powerful man on earth. He tells these lowly Hebrew midwives, when these Hebrews are giving birth, if it's a girl, you can let it live. But if it's a boy, I want you to kill it. You see, I'm going to wipe out these people. And as the girls grow up, they'll have to marry Egyptian boys. And here in a few generations, we'll be through with this Hebrew problem. But it says that the women wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. It says they feared God and didn't do it. Now, the truth is they had to have feared Pharaoh as well, right? I mean, he was the most powerful man on the planet. The Pharaohs ruled Egypt for 3,000 years. They were considered gods. They considered themselves a god. So the truth is they feared Pharaoh. It's that they feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh. Or maybe even said another way, they feared absolute truth and ethics. They feared what they knew to be right and wrong. They feared that more than they feared the tyrant responsible for Egypt. So the uneasy question that I get to haunt you with this morning is, what are we afraid of? What are you afraid of? What fear is driving you this week, this day? Whether you're a middle schooler and you're afraid of fitting in and looking like everybody else, or maybe you're a little bit older and your fear is not standing out and not looking like everybody else, or maybe you're a young adult trying to figure out how to manage children and career and how all this is happening in this crazy, fast-paced world. How are you going to manage that? And that's your fear. Maybe you're a little older and you're afraid of how you're going to save for retirement. Or maybe you're even older and you're worried about, well, where is my wealth going? Where is my health going? Fearful for the direction of our country. Thinking about your life. Did it matter? Am I done? You see, it's all fear. Someone I love to read is the late Frederick Buechner. He was an author and pastor. And Buechner sums up well what we were afraid of most days. He said, we're afraid of being human. He said, we're awake, we're conscious. We know what we are, and most of all, we know what we are not, and perhaps what we could be. He said the first thing that Adam and Eve did when they ate from that forbidden tree is that they're afraid and they hide. They hide because of their nakedness and shame. When Moses saw God in a burning bush, he knew it was a holy place, but it says he hid his face. Perhaps Moses knew who he was and who he was not. Maybe he even had some idea of what God might be asking him to do, and he didn't want to do it. He was afraid. Can't you just send somebody else? Buechner jokes that we know this from the moment we are born. From the moment we come out of our mother's womb, we know this. He says we come out of our mother's womb, we take this deep breath, and we begin to cry. We cry with all we have. It's like we're faced with what we are and what we are not. Naked and afraid, and there's nothing left to do but cry. So what are we afraid of? Are we hiding in our shame like Adam and Eve? Or perhaps we're more like Moses, just tending the herds in Midian, happy, comfortable, doing just fine, not looking for any kind of change. Can't you send somebody else? You know, maybe that is our biggest fear, or maybe it's my biggest fear. Maybe our fear is that all of this is absolutely 100% true. All of it. God, the resurrection, Jesus, the burning bush, all of it. And our fear is what that means to our comfortable lives. Or are we more like the brave Hebrew midwives in Exodus, realizing that we need to fear ethics and truth? We need to fear God more than the Pharaoh. Another author and speaker that I like a lot is Dr. Jordan Peterson. And if you know anything about Dr. Peterson, you know he stays in political hot water all the time. And the reason is simple. He continues to say what he believes to be true. And it turns out in these days, that's all it takes to be in political hot water all the time. And he says people come up to him all the time and they say how brave he is for saying the things that he says publicly. And he says he really doesn't feel that brave. He says he is afraid of the consequences, and he's felt some of the consequences from the things he said to him and his family. But what he says is, I'm more afraid of what will happen if I do not say what I believe to be true. I'm more afraid of what will happen if people stop speaking truth to power. And the example he uses is the Hebrew midwives from Exodus chapter 1. Dr. Peterson says he chooses to fear God more than Pharaoh. And it's like Moses. I mean, that's what Moses actually ends up doing. He accepts the challenge. He ends up fearing God more than his internal fears. He fears God more than Pharaoh. He gives up his comfortable life, and he does more. And he ended up living a life that he could have never even imagined. Can you imagine the experiences and how close that brought him to God? So close that the Torah ends, Deuteronomy ends with the line, since then no prophet has arisen like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. So we started with the Empire State Building, and then we went to the Hebrew midwives, and now the parable of the talents. We just heard it read, and we're likely somewhat familiar with the story, but Jesus tells this story about this master who was leaving, and he has these 3 servants, and he gives one of them 5 talents, one of them 2 talents, and one of them 1 talent. Now, the person with 5, they were very good, and they doubled their talents, and the master was very pleased. He says, well done, good and faithful servant. And the same with the 2. The guy with the 2 talents, he doubles that. Same response, well done, good and faithful servant. But the servant with 1 talent, he's the tiptoe through life servant, playing it safe. He buries it, and the master was not happy with him at all. In fact, he ends up in that place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, and we don't want that. So the parable is explained that God wants you to use your talents, both money and other talents, to further the kingdom. And that's right. That's a good explanation. But in another sermon, Frederick Buechner asked us to expand the idea of what we mean by talent, what Jesus meant by talent in the parable. And he asked us to include everything we've been given, all experiences, even, or perhaps even especially, our painful experiences, our pain and suffering. Because what many people tend to do with pain and suffering is to bury it, and bury it deep. We imagine if we bury the pain, we just don't realize how much of ourselves we're burying with it, and it never heals. The Franciscan father, Richard Rohr, he says that if you do not transform your pain, you will transmit it. If you do not transform your pain, you will transmit it. And we know what that looks like in our polarized society. But Buechner takes this further. He's asking us to think about this as it's not just about us and our healing. It's about other people. Because it's never just about us. He said it's about this process of facing our pain and hurt, owning it, and then trying to do something redemptive with it to help others, that it would be multiplied so that we can help others. He suggests that our pain and suffering is something also that has been given to us, entrusted to us, something that we are to be stewards of. And in Jesus' parable, it's that third servant, that play it safe, tiptoe through life servant, is the one who buries that talent. He buries the pain, and he receives the wrath of his master. You know, what we've been given, that's what we've been given. Everything beautiful and glorious, and everything painful and hurtful. That is what we've been given. It's all we have. And Jesus is asking us to use it. Use it all for the sake of others. Walt Turpinning, which many of you probably know, is a guy that goes to our church. And he gave me an analogy years ago, and I've used it many times. This analogy is about a tree. And he said, you've cut down this tree, and you're looking at the cross-section of the tree. You're looking at the rings of the tree. And he explains that when you're looking at the rings of a tree, you can see more than just the age of the tree. You can actually see the life of that tree. He said you can see the good years, the years with lots of sunshine and lots of rain. And you can see the bad years. You can see the years of a severe drought or a forest fire, or maybe even a strike of lightning. But he said, here's the thing. When you take the wood from that tree and you hand it to a craftsman, when you take the wood from that tree and you hand it to an artist, he said it's the combination of the good and bad years, the good and bad stuff. It's that combination that gives the wood its character. It's a combination of the good and the bad years that gives the beauty to the grain. He said, in the hands of an artist, it's the life of the tree that becomes a work of art. But see, unlike that tree, we have a choice. We don't have to let the artist do anything with our life. In fact, we can bury it. We can tiptoe through life. Or we can find the courage of the Hebrew midwives and not be afraid to act. Because if you act, it might be huge. It might be big. It might be life-changing. It could be world-changing. Or maybe it'll be small. But it's Mother Teresa that said this so well. She said, we cannot all do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. We cannot all do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. So let's resolve. Let's resolve to stop tiptoeing. Let's find the bravery of the Hebrew midwives, and God will multiply our talents. Multiply everything we've been given, good and bad, everything we do. And when that happens, we do join God's movement. We join God's movement to restore all things, to put the world back together. And when the Master returns, we get to hear those words. Well done, good and faithful servant. Shalom.